Bill Maher cracked a joke on live TV, expecting laughs, but Jasmine Crockett's stunning response left him speechless and the audience in shock. It started with an email, polite, professional, strategically vague. Congresswoman Crockett, we'd love to have you join us on Real Time for a spirited discussion on race, justice, and American politics. The phrase, spirited discussion, was classic Maher speak. A euphemism. What it really meant was, we're setting the stage. You're the target. Crockett's team knew this. They'd seen what happened to past guests, the ambush-style commentary, the smirks, the interruptions dressed up as punchlines. It was less conversation, more gladiator arena. But something about the timing felt right. Crockett was riding high after a viral congressional clip. Her name was hot. Her presence, magnetic. Still, hesitation lingered. Her communications director warned her, Bill's not going to play fair. Her chief of staff added, they want fireworks, not substance. But Crockett? She didn't flinch. Good, she said. Let them light the match. I'll bring the fire. With a single call, the appearance was confirmed. The internet found out minutes later. Within hours, Crockett vs. Maher was trending. Twitter exploded. Instagram reels dissected old Maher clips, painting him as a relic. TikTok teens cheered on Crockett as the people's champion. Reddit threads speculated that this would be the cultural clash of the year. And HBO? They couldn't believe their luck. They promoted the episode with gleeful precision. 2 sharp minds. 1 stage. This Friday. What they didn't say was that the fuse had already been lit. Crockett prepped quietly, methodically. She reviewed tapes. She dissected Maher's tactics. Her team built a war room of facts, quotes, and strategies. This wasn't just an interview, it was a battlefield. Meanwhile, Maher leaned into his usual arrogance. He wasn't preparing. He was waiting, smiling, cocky, convinced this was just another rookie guest walking into the lion's den. But this time, the lion wasn't in control. The stage was set. The spotlight, blinding. The world, watching. No one, not even Maher, could predict what would happen when these two forces finally collided. And when they did, history would remember. Backstage at Real Time, the air was heavy, not just with lights and cameras, but with expectation. Jasmine Crockett sat still, centered, composed. Her team gave her final cues, but she didn't need them. Her eyes were locked on the dressing room mirror, not out of vanity, but precision. This wasn't about looking good. It was about showing up, showing strength. Just feet away, Bill Maher was pacing the hallway with the casual arrogance of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. Hair powdered, cufflinks gleaming, that trademark smirk glued to his face like armor. His jokes with producers weren't just jokes, they were barbed signals. She's got fire, huh? Let's see if it's real or just Twitter hype. They laughed, nervously. The green room encounter was brief, a handshake, a glance, a flash of teeth. Crockett nodded, professional. Maher, ever the performer, leaned in just enough to be heard by everyone nearby. Hope you're ready for a real conversation tonight. Subtle, measured, but loaded. Crockett replied coolly, only if you're ready for real answers. And that was it, the first chess move. As the countdown began and theme music blared through the studio, producers scrambled, microphones checked, lights locked in. The audience, a curated blend of regulars and HBO insiders, buzzed with electricity. From the outside, it looked like any other episode. But behind every glance, every pause, every smirk and silence, something deeper was stirring. Maher thought he'd rattle her, thought he'd lead. But Jasmine Crockett didn't come to play defense. She came to disrupt. The cameras rolled. The lights hit. Bill Maher leaned into his desk, with that familiar faux casual posture, a practiced mix of sarcasm and superiority. Joining us tonight, he began, is Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, firebrand, activist, and apparently the internet's latest obsession. The audience chuckled, but Crockett didn't blink. Thanks for having me, Bill, she said, voice steady. Let's hope obsession leads to understanding. The first topic? Policing in America. Maher pounced, rattling off cherry-picked crime stats and framing protests as chaos. He raised his eyebrows with performative concern. Why do people still act like it's 1,965? Crockett didn't hesitate. Because in some zip codes it still is, she shot back. The difference is, now we have cell phones to prove it. Cheers erupted. Maher tried to pivot, bringing up crime in Chicago, defunding the police, and the danger of identity politics. But Crockett came armed. She dropped federal funding figures, quoted DOJ reports, named names. She called out systemic failures and called in real solutions. Maher interrupted. She cut back harder. Every time he tried to steer the conversation with sarcasm, she brought it crashing down with substance. Every deflection was met with data. Every snide remark met with conviction. The live audience wasn't just watching, they were shifting. What started as a typical real-time sparring session had turned into something else entirely. A reckoning. Crockett wasn't just holding her own, she was flipping the power dynamic in real time. Maher's smile began to tighten. His jokes missed the mark. The room, once his playground, now felt unfamiliar. And it was only just beginning. America was watching. And it couldn't look away. The debate had already gone deeper and sharper than anyone in the control room anticipated. Jasmine Crockett had Bill Maher cornered. Every attempt to reduce her to a soundbite, to trap her in a joke, had been effortlessly dismantled. She wasn't playing defense. She was controlling the tempo, the rhythm, the room. And Maher? He was losing it. His interruptions grew shorter, more desperate. The usual glint of arrogance in his eyes was slowly being replaced with something else. Irritation, insecurity, maybe even fear. For the first time in years, Maher looked like a man off script. They had moved on to the legacy of slavery and reparations. Maher, with his usual detachment, joked about the grievance industry. He mocked woke politics with a tired punchline that didn't land. Crockett responded, razor sharp, grievances don't age out when the system that caused them is still writing the rules. The audience clapped. Some stood. Maher's face tightened. He rolled his eyes, leaned back, and with a half laugh and full bitterness said it, why don't you just go back to Africa then? The air was ripped out of the room. Silence. Not the silence of awkwardness, the silence of a nation freezing in real time. The live audience didn't move. Some blinked in disbelief. Others looked around, waiting for anyone to explain that they'd misheard. But they hadn't. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch, didn't storm out, didn't scream. She simply stared. Calm, cold, cutting. And Maher? Even he looked shocked by what had just come out of his mouth. The smirk was gone. A few producers moved in the background. An assistant whispered frantically. HBO execs watching the live feed from the control room were already on the phone. This wasn't a gaffe. This wasn't a joke. It was a moment that split the timeline. And it was about to hit the world. The moment the words left Maher's mouth, the internet detonated. Clips of the exchange hit Twitter within minutes. No music, no edits. Just raw footage of Maher's face and the exact second he crossed the line. The caption was always the same. He really said it. Within the hour, Cancel Maher was trending #1 in the US. Close behind, Stand with Crockett. Outrage moved faster than fire. TikTok creators posted frame-by-frame breakdowns. Instagram stories plastered Crockett's face with quotes like, poised under fire, and the clapback queen stayed silent, and still won. MSNBC cut into scheduled programming. CNN brought in crisis media analysts. Fox News, predictably, doubled down on Maher's right to free speech, but even their hosts looked stunned. Maher's defenders tried to spin it. They called it sarcasm. They said he was taken out of context. But there was no spin big enough to cover what he had done. Because the clip wasn't confusing. It was clear. And more than that, it was a revelation. For many viewers, it was the final confirmation that Maher wasn't the clever provocateur he once claimed to be. He was something else now, a man out of time, exposed by the very woman he tried to undermine. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett remained silent. Not a tweet, not a statement, not even a subtle repost. And that silence? It wasn't absence. It was power. America waited, phones in hand, screens glowing, hearts racing. Everyone's supporters, critics, pundits, trolls, wanted to hear what she'd say next. But she was letting the moment breathe. And as it did, it suffocated the very myth Maher had built his career on, that he was untouchable. He wasn't. Not anymore. The show didn't end with applause. It ended with Jasmine Crockett standing up calm, unshaken and walking off the stage. Not a word. Not a glance. No fiery rebuttal, no breakdown, no rebuttal tweet composed mid-exit. Just a deliberate, powerful silence that said more than any outburst ever could. The studio stood still. Even Bill Maher didn't speak. He simply sat there, eyes wide, the weight of what had happened beginning to set in. The closing credits rolled, but nobody was watching. Across the country, millions waited. Cameras chased Crockett as she exited the building. Reporters shouted her name, phones and mics pointed at her like weapons. "Do you have a response, Congresswoman? Are you calling for Maher to be fired? Was this a setup?" She didn't answer. Not yet. Her team, visibly tense, blocked press as she climbed into a black SUV and disappeared into the Los Angeles night. No Instagram post, no press conference, no strategically worded tweet storm. Just silence. But the country? It was screaming. Think pieces hit the web within the hour. Podcasts dropped emergency episodes. Media personalities took to the airwaves, some in defense, others in denial. Protesters gathered outside HBO's offices by morning. Boycotts were announced, subscriptions canceled, panels convened. But still nothing from Crockett. And the longer she waited, the louder the world became. The silence was no longer passive. It was pressure. A silence that demanded interpretation. A silence that put the entire country on edge. What would she say? Would she unleash? Would she forgive? Would she burn it all down? The suspense wasn't just about her reaction, it was about her power. She held the narrative in her hands. She could steer the conversation, or she could end it. She had Maher and much of America exactly where she wanted them. Waiting. 3 days later, the silence broke. No press conference. No headline-chasing network exclusive. Just a single video posted to Jasmine Crockett's official channels. A simple backdrop. Soft lighting. No bells, no edits. Just her. She looked directly into the camera. Calm, grounded, commanding. And then she spoke. When someone tells you to go back to Africa, they're not just talking to you. They're talking to every ancestor who built this country with their bare hands. No rage, no profanity, just truth delivered like a sermon, wrapped in the kind of dignity that can't be faked. Crockett didn't drag Maher. She didn't have to. Instead, she educated. She walked America through centuries of dehumanization, from the slave ships to the plantations to the present-day media studios still comfortable reducing black brilliance to a punchline. She talked about resilience, not revenge. Power, not pity. "I'm not going back," she said, "because I never left. My roots are here in the soil, in the streets, in the struggle, and in the progress. I belong, and no one gets to erase that." Her words weren't just a clapback. They were a call to consciousness, a masterclass in how to flip an insult into an indictment of the system that allows it to fester. She didn't frame herself as a victim. She framed herself as a mirror reflecting back America's unhealed wounds. Within hours, the video was everywhere. Celebrities reposted it with messages of solidarity. Civil rights leaders called it one of the most powerful public responses in modern political memory. College professors assigned it in their classrooms. Church pulpits quoted it the following Sunday. Even Maher's critics paused, not out of pity, but out of respect. Because Crockett hadn't just answered a slur. She had answered a centuries-old question. What do you do when the system tries to erase you with words? Her answer was simple. You rise. You speak. And you remind them who you are. The fallout was immediate and it was brutal. Within 24 hours of Jasmine Crockett's poised, devastating response, HBO was under siege. Emails flooded the network's inboxes. Viewer hotlines melted down with angry calls. Entire Reddit threads were devoted to digging up Maher's past racially charged quips, painting a clear pattern of behavior long hidden behind the curtain of comedy. But this wasn't just digital outrage. Major sponsors began pulling out. Big-name advertiser tech giants, beverage brands, and luxury car makers distanced themselves from real-time with Bill Maher publicly, citing incompatibility with our brand values. One by one, the ad breaks shrank, and where commercials once ran, HBO aired vague filler promos, trying to stop the bleeding. Inside the network, panic set in. Executives held emergency meetings, legal teams drafted contingency statements, and PR firms were brought in to do damage control. There were calls for Maher's suspension. Some within HBO wanted to cancel the show altogether quietly, permanently, to make the firestorm go away. But others? They were defiant. The country split, and the fault lines were loud. Progressive politicians, civil rights leaders, and activists came out swinging. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley tweeted, "Black women shouldn't have to carry this burden, but when they do it with power and grace." Jasmine Crockett, we see you. Senator Cory Booker added, there's nothing funny about telling a black woman to go back to Africa. This isn't free speech, it's bigotry dressed up as wit. But conservative pundits and libertarian provocateurs rallied to Maher's side. Tucker Carlson called Crockett's response a woke overreaction. Joe Rogan labeled the backlash manufactured outrage. Ben Shapiro went live for 2 hours defending Maher's right to offend. The culture war was now fully ignited, with Maher at its center and Crockett standing tall in the eye of the storm. HBO tried to ride the line, but the pressure was building. And everyone knew Maher would have to address it. The only question was show. The next Friday, the studio lights came on once again, but the energy was different, darker, tense. The audience was smaller than usual, quieter, more curious than supportive. Bill Maher walked on stage alone, no band, no guests, just him. He looked into the camera and sighed. Deep, performative, calculated. And then he launched. I'm not going to apologize, he began. I'm going to explain. The audience stayed still. No laughter, no applause. He continued, in a country where everyone's offended by everything, apparently satire is now a hate crime. What I said? It was sarcasm, a joke. Taken out of context deliberately, I might add to fit a narrative. It wasn't a monologue, it was a rant. He attacked the woke mob, accused HBO's sponsors of corporate cowardice, called his critics keyboard warriors who've never told a joke in their lives, and then, with a smirk more hollow than ever, he said, if telling someone to go back to Africa gets me canceled, then maybe the truth is, America can't handle comedy anymore. There it was. No remorse, no reflection, just defiance, cloaked in the language of free speech and comedic martyrdom. Social media erupted. Supporters framed him as a truth-teller under siege. Finally, someone who won't bow to the mob, they cheered. But for many more, this was the last straw. Jasmine Crockett responded not with words, but with a repost of Maher's monologue and a single caption. This isn't comedy, this is cowardice. Her words hit harder than any punchline. And behind the scenes, Maher's position grew more fragile. Anonymous HBO staff leaked their disgust. Writers refused to show up. At least 2 high-profile guests canceled their upcoming appearances. What Maher thought would be his triumphant return to dominance. It became a mirror, reflecting everything he no longer was. He hadn't regained control. He had cemented his collapse. Bill Maher's words may have sparked the fire, but Jasmine Crockett's silence, her restraint, and ultimately her dignified defiance had ignited something far greater. A movement. It started small, a few tweets, then threads. But within days, Crockett supporters were turning online outrage into organized action. Activist groups launched the We Belong Here campaign, inspired by her words. Digital town halls sprang up, pulling in scholars, artists, clergy, and everyday people who had heard echoes of Maher's insult in their own lives. They weren't just talking about the moment, they were using it as a mirror. Black women, in particular, led the charge. From college campuses in Atlanta to community centers in Detroit, panel discussions and teach-ins tackled race, media accountability, and the weaponization of comedy as a smokescreen for racism. Think pieces poured out from The Atlantic, The Root, Teen Vogue, and even Forbes, each one unpacking what it meant when a late-night host told a black congresswoman to go back to Africa, and why that moment hit with such historical weight. Crockett, meanwhile, stayed focused, not performative. She appeared at events not as a victim, but as a vessel for deeper conversation. At a rally in Washington, she stepped up to the mic and said, "This is not about one man and one sentence. This is about centuries of being told we don't belong, and finally saying enough." Crowds roared. Footage from the event racked up millions of views in hours. The movement wasn't just a protest, it was a reclamation. And it scared the establishment. Media executives began privately scrambling to figure out how to position themselves. Politicians who once avoided Crockett were now eager to be photographed beside her. Even brands started jumping on the wave, not out of sincerity but survival. Because now, this was bigger than Maher. This was America in conversation with itself, and Jasmine Crockett had become its unexpected, unstoppable moderator. While Jasmine Crockett's movement soared, the cracks inside HBO deepened. Internally, whispers turned to revolt. Writers from Real Time began leaking emails to the press, revealing that many of them had begged Maher to apologize. Instead, he doubled down, and in doing so, dragged the entire production team down with him. One staffer anonymously told Rolling Stone, "He's not just ignoring the backlash, he's feeding off it, and we're the ones taking the hit." HBO executives were torn. Some had been Maher loyalists for decades. He was, after all, a ratings juggernaut, or at least he used to be. But the tide had turned. Maher was no longer the smart, contrarian voice of reason. Now he was the face of a media generation out of step, out of touch, and exposed. Major media outlets began demanding accountability. The New York Times ran a front-page editorial, "When free speech becomes free reign." The Washington Post followed with, "Who gets to joke and who pays the price?" Even 60 Minutes scheduled a segment titled, "Bill Maher, Comic or Crisis?" It was no longer a question of free speech, it was a question of institutional ethics. Then came the bombshell. Civil rights leaders stepped in. Reverend Al Sharpton called for HBO to suspend Maher immediately. The NAACP released an official statement demanding a review of long-standing systemic tolerance for racialized rhetoric masked as satire. Even Dr. Bernice King, daughter of Martin Luther King Jr., tweeted, "Silence from the top is complicity. HBO must choose between legacy and accountability." And suddenly, the network was cornered. Maher's show, once their safe bet, had become a public relations liability. Sponsors weren't just pulling ads now, they were publicly denouncing him. Production teams were threatening walkouts. HBO board members, once dismissive of the backlash, now demanded closed-door meetings on damage control. One insider called it an existential crisis. Maher had built a career on crossing lines. But now, the very institutions that once protected him were preparing to draw one in ink. And for the first time in his career, it looked like that line might be behind him. With HBO in crisis mode, ad revenue in freefall, and public pressure mounting by the hour, Bill Maher did something no one expected. He blinked. After weeks of resistance, defiance, and smug silence, Maher agreed to what his team had desperately tried to avoid: a public reckoning. But there was a catch. He wouldn't do a sit-down apology. He wouldn't grovel, and he definitely wouldn't cede control. Instead, he proposed a live debate. One-on-one, televised, unfiltered. But Crockett's team was 2 steps ahead. They agreed in one condition: it would not be hosted on real time. It would not be produced by HBO, and Maher would have no editorial control. The venue, a neutral network, primetime, commercial-free. The host, a Pulitzer Prize-winning black journalist with zero tolerance for spin. The format, no scripts, no edits, no safe zones. It was everything Maher hated and exactly what America demanded. Crockett, unfazed, accepted the invitation without hesitation. No preconditions, no theatrics. She knew what this was. It wasn't just a debate. It was an exorcism of an entire culture that had for too long laughed at pain disguised as edgy humor. The announcement alone was seismic. CNN called it the most anticipated live political confrontation in years. MSNBC labeled it a cultural trial by fire. Social media exploded with promos and countdowns. Maher vs. Crockett trended for a week straight. This wasn't just TV, it was a verdict. One would leave with credibility, the other with consequences. The lights dimmed, the cameras rolled. 2 podiums, no desk, no jokes, no laugh track, just 2 people and the full weight of a nation's tension between them. Jasmine Crockett walked out first. Elegant, controlled, eyes forward, chin high. The audience stood not in ovation but in reverence. Then Maher, stiffer than usual, smile thinner. Gone was the swagger. He wasn't on his turf anymore and he knew it. The moderator opened. "Tonight isn't about punishment, it's about accountability. Congresswoman Crockett, you have the floor." And with that, she began. Not with rage, not with accusation, but with truth. "I'm not here because a man insulted me. I'm here because that insult revealed how comfortable America still is with the dehumanization of black voices." She turned to Maher. "What you said wasn't a joke, it was a reveal of what's still hiding behind so-called liberal intellect, a reveal of how racism adapts, even as it pretends to evolve." Maher tried to interrupt. She didn't let him. "You don't get to hide behind comedy," she said sharply. "Not when that comedy becomes a weapon. Not when it reinforces systems that still deny people like me our full humanity on screen, on stage, and in office." The room was silent, unblinking. Maher shuffled in his place. He offered a clumsy defense. "I've said worse to Republicans. People are too sensitive. I meant it satirically. But none of it landed. Because Crockett wasn't arguing, she was educating. Free speech gives you the right to speak, she said, but it doesn't shield you from the responsibility of what your words do. Applause erupted, not performative, not partisan. It was recognition of truth, of pain, of power reclaimed. For the first time in his career, Maher stood across from someone who wasn't there to trade barbs, she was there to break the cycle. And as the debate closed, one thing became unmistakably clear. Crockett hadn't just confronted a man. She had confronted a mindset. And America was listening. When the cameras cut and the stage emptied, the moment didn't end. It echoed. Across newsrooms, classrooms, boardrooms, and dinner tables, the conversation had shifted. Not just about race, not just about comedy, but about power, who holds it, who protects it, and who dares to challenge it. Jasmine Crockett emerged from the ashes of insult not as a survivor but as a symbol of a new kind of leadership rooted in truth, integrity, and unapologetic Black womanhood. Her calm under fire, her clarity in chaos, had turned a viral moment into a generational flashpoint. She wasn't just trending anymore, she was being studied, cited, and celebrated. Campaign donations to Crockett surged overnight. Her approval ratings spiked across demographics. Talk of a Senate run began circulating in major political circles. Op-eds declared her the conscience of Congress. College students wore T-shirts bearing her quotes. Activists called her a lighthouse in a fog of performance politics. She didn't need to scream to be heard. She simply spoke, and the country couldn't ignore her. Meanwhile, Bill Maher's future? Uncertain. HBO announced a creative hiatus for Real Time. Sponsors stayed away. Viewership plummeted. Maher himself disappeared from public appearances, reduced to podcast cameos and late-night radio spots defending free speech to shrinking audiences. His legacy, once defined by pushing boundaries, was now haunted by the one boundary he pushed too far. He had become a case study, not in courage, but in collapse. And America? America was different now. The incident forced a reckoning not just on race, but on how media weaponizes mockery, how intellect gets confused with insight, and how long this country has tolerated cruelty masquerading as cleverness. Jasmine Crockett didn't set out to start a movement, but she sparked one anyway. Not by shouting over the noise, but by standing inside, eyes unshaken, unmoved, unbothered, and showing the world how dignity can silence even the loudest disrespect. Her legacy isn't one of revenge. It's one of redirection. A reminder that progress doesn't always come from institutions. Sometimes it comes from one woman, standing firm in the face of it all, saying, "We're not going back, we're building forward." This story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.